feel like sexy ends when I'm not sexiest man alive anymore. I don't feel like it exists anymore. I feel like it's over whenever I was sexiest man alive.
You know John Wayne, right? The tall, tough cowboy who rode horses across the silver screen and became one of the biggest movie stars America has ever seen. For decades, he was the face of American heroism, the guy everyone looked up to. But here's something that might shock you. Not everyone loved John Wayne. In fact, one of Hollywood's most respected actors absolutely despised him. We're talking about a hatred so deep, so personal, that it lasted for years and years. The actor who couldn't stand John Wayne was none other than Kirk Douglas, and the reasons behind their bitter feud are finally coming to light. Get ready, because this story is going to take you behind the glamorous curtain of old Hollywood and show you that even legends had enemies. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine Hollywood in the 1950s and 60s. This was the golden age of cinema, when movie stars were treated like royalty, and their films were events that brought entire families to the theater. John Wayne was at the top of his game during this time. He starred in westerns and war movies that made millions of dollars. He played cowboys, soldiers, and tough guys who always saved the day. People loved him because he represented something they believed in, a certain kind of American strength and courage. But Kirk Douglas, another incredibly talented actor who was making his own mark in Hollywood, saw something very different when he looked at John Wayne. Kirk Douglas was no small player himself. This man starred in some of the most important films of his generation. He was in Spartacus, a massive historical epic about a slave rebellion in ancient Rome. He was in Paths of Glory, a powerful war film that showed the ugly side of military leadership. Kirk Douglas was known for playing complex, intense characters who weren't afraid to show weakness or struggle with difficult choices. He was an actor who took risks, who wanted to tell stories that meant something and made people think. And that's exactly where the problem started between him and John Wayne. See, John Wayne and Kirk Douglas represented two completely different approaches to acting and to life itself. John Wayne was old school in every sense of the word. He believed in a certain type of movie, a certain type of hero, and a certain type of America. His characters were usually straightforward, strong men who knew right from wrong and never questioned their path. They didn't show much emotion, they didn't cry, and they certainly didn't admit when they were scared or unsure. To John Wayne, that's what a real man looked like, and that's what American audiences wanted to see. Kirk Douglas couldn't have disagreed more. He thought that kind of storytelling was too simple, too one-dimensional. He believed that real characters, real people, were complicated. They had doubts, they made mistakes, they struggled with their choices. Kirk wanted to make movies that explored these deeper issues, that asked hard questions instead of just giving easy answers, and he didn't keep these opinions to himself. Kirk Douglas was known for speaking his mind, and he made it pretty clear that he thought John Wayne's style of acting and the movies he chose to make were outdated and, frankly, not very good. But the hatred between these two men went deeper than just artistic differences. There was a political side to this story that made everything even more intense. You see, John Wayne was extremely conservative in his political views. He was a strong supporter of the Republican Party, and he was very vocal about his beliefs. During the 1950s, there was a period in American history called the Red Scare, when people were terrified of communism spreading in the United States. The government started investigating people, especially in Hollywood, to find out if they had any connections to communist groups or ideas. This was a dark time when careers were destroyed based on accusations that weren't always true. John Wayne supported these investigations. He believed that communism was a real threat to America and that it needed to be stopped at all costs. He even helped create an organization called the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals, which basically worked to keep what they saw as dangerous political ideas out of Hollywood movies. Some people saw John Wayne as a patriot who was protecting his country. Others, including Kirk Douglas, saw him as someone who was helping to ruin innocent people's lives and careers. Kirk Douglas took a very different stance during this scary time in Hollywood. He didn't believe in blacklisting people or destroying their careers because of their political beliefs. In fact, Kirk Douglas made a bold move that showed exactly where he stood. When he was producing the movie Spartacus, he insisted on giving credit to the screenwriter, a man named Dalton Trumbo. This might not sound like a big deal, but it was absolutely huge at the time. You see, Dalton Trumbo was one of the Hollywood 10, a group of writers and directors who had been blacklisted because they refused to cooperate with the government's investigation. On into communism in Hollywood. For years, Dalton Trumbo had been writing scripts under fake names because no studio would hire him under his real name. Kirk Douglas knew this was wrong. He believed that Dalton Trumbo was a brilliant writer who deserved recognition for his work, regardless of his political beliefs. So Kirk fought to put Trumbo's real name on the credits of Spartacus. This was a risky move that could have hurt Kirk's own career, but he did it anyway because he believed it was the right thing to do, and it worked. After Spartacus came out with Dalton Trumbo's name proudly displayed, the blacklist started to crumble. Kirk Douglas had helped end one of the darkest chapters in Hollywood history. Now imagine how John Wayne felt about all this. Here was Kirk Douglas, publicly taking a stand that went against everything John Wayne believed in. To John Wayne, Kirk was supporting people he saw as enemies of America. To Kirk Douglas, John Wayne was a bully who used his power and influence to hurt people who didn't deserve it. The divide between them wasn't just about politics or acting styles anymore. It became personal. It became about their values, their sense of right and wrong, their very different views of what America should be. The tension between these two men showed up in various ways over the years. They never worked together on a film, which makes sense when you think about how much they disliked each other. At Hollywood parties and events, they would avoid each other or exchange cold, brief greetings if they absolutely had to interact. People who knew both of them could feel the tension in the air whenever they were in the same room. It was like watching two powerful forces that were never meant to be near each other, like oil and water that simply refused to mix. Kirk Douglas was particularly bothered by what he saw as John Wayne's hypocrisy. You see, John Wayne played all these tough military heroes in his movies, soldiers who fought bravely in wars and inspired audiences with their courage. But here's the thing that really got under Kirk's skin. John Wayne never actually served in the military during World War II. When the war broke out and so many actors and regular Americans rushed to enlist and fight for their country, John Wayne stayed in Hollywood making movies. He had various reasons for not serving, including his age and family situation, and technically he was within his rights to stay home. But Kirk Douglas couldn't help but notice the irony of someone who avoided real combat becoming the biggest war hero on screen. Kirk Douglas, on the other hand, tried to enlist in the Navy during World War II, though he was ultimately rejected for medical reasons. Many other actors of their generation, like James Stewart and Clark Gable, did serve and saw real combat. To Kirk, there was something false about John Wayne's whole persona. Here was a man who built his entire career on playing the ultimate American warrior, the guy who never backed down from a fight. But when his country actually needed him, he stayed safe in Hollywood. Kirk felt this was dishonest, and it added another layer to his dislike of the man. The way these two men approached their careers also couldn't have been more different. John Wayne was comfortable. He found a formula that worked, playing basically the same character over and over again, and he stuck with it because audiences loved it, and it made him incredibly wealthy and famous. Kirk Douglas, on the other hand, as constantly pushing himself and taking risks. He played a boxer struggling with corruption in Champion. He played a ruthless movie producer in The Bad and the Beautiful. He played Vincent van Gogh in Lust for Life. Each role was different, challenging, and required him to dig deep emotionally. Kirk believed that acting was an art form, something that should challenge both the actor and the audience. He thought movies should make people think and feel and question things. John Wayne believed that movies should entertain people and make them feel good about being American. Neither approach was necessarily wrong, but they were fundamentally incompatible, and neither man had any respect for what the other was trying to do. There's also the fact that both men had big egos, which probably shouldn't surprise anyone. You don't become a huge movie star without having a pretty strong sense of yourself and your abilities. John Wayne believed he was important not just as an actor, but as a symbol of American values. He took this role seriously and saw himself as someone who had a responsibility to represent a certain ideal. Kirk Douglas also knew his worth. He was proud of his talent and his willingness to take on difficult, important projects. He wasn't about to bow down to anyone. even someone as famous as John Wayne, if he thought that person was wrong. Their feud was never really public in a scandalous tabloid kind of way. These were two professionals who kept their dislike mostly private, expressing it through subtle comments in interviews or through their choice to never work together. But people in Hollywood knew. Directors knew, producers knew, other actors knew. The hatred between John Wayne and Kirk Douglas was one of those open secrets that everyone was aware of, but nobody really talked about openly. As the years went on and both men got older, their differences only seemed to become more pronounced. John Wayne became even more conservative and more vocal about his political beliefs. He supported the Vietnam War strongly at a time when many Americans, especially younger people, were protesting against it. He even directed and starred in a movie called The Green Berets that was basically pro-war propaganda. Kirk Douglas, meanwhile, continued to choose projects that challenged the status quo and asked difficult questions. What makes this story even more fascinating is that both men were incredibly successful despite their completely different approaches. John Wayne remained one of the biggest box office draws in the world right up until his death in 1979. Kirk Douglas had a long, respected career that lasted well into his 90s, and he became known not just as a great actor, but as someone who stood up for what he believed in, even when it was risky or unpopular. They proved that there was room in Hollywood for very different types of stars, but that didn't mean those stars had to like or respect each other. Looking back now, we can see that the hatred between John Wayne and Kirk Douglas was really about much more than two actors not getting along. It was about two different visions of America, two different ideas about what movies should be, and two different types of courage. John Wayne represented a kind of patriotism that was simple and certain, that believed in the righteousness of America and didn't question authority. Kirk Douglas represented a more complicated kind of patriotism, one that believed you could love your country while also criticizing it and pushing it to be better. The truth is, both men left important legacies. John Wayne's films still play on television and streaming services, and people still recognize his name and his image, even if they weren't alive when he was making movies. His influence on the Western genre and on how Americans saw themselves as heroes can't be denied. Kirk Douglas also left behind an incredible body of work, films that are studied in film schools and that continue to move audiences with their emotional power and complexity. His courage in breaking the blacklist helped restore fairness and decency to Hollywood at a time when fear was ruling the industry. But knowing about their feud, understanding why Kirk Douglas hated John Wayne so deeply, gives us a richer understanding of both men. It reminds us that even legends are human, that they have strong opinions and sometimes very good reasons for disliking each other. It also reminds us that art and politics have always been connected, that the movies we watch and the actors we admire are shaped by real beliefs and real conflicts. In the end, Kirk Douglas and John Wayne represented two sides of the same industry, two sides of American culture itself. One valued tradition, strength, and certainty. The other valued progress, complexity, and the courage to speak truth to power. They couldn't stand each other, and honestly, given how different their worldviews were, it's hard to imagine how they ever could have been friends. But maybe that's okay. Maybe Hollywood, like America itself, is big enough to contain these contradictions, to hold space for people who completely disagree with each other, but who are both, in their own way, trying to say something important. So now you know the real story behind one of Hollywood's most bitter feuds. Kirk Douglas didn't hate John Wayne because of some petty jealousy or personal slight. He hated him because of what John Wayne stood for, because of the choices he made both on screen and off, because Kirk genuinely believed that John Wayne's vision of America and of cinema was harmful and limiting. Whether you agree with Kirk or with John Wayne probably says a lot about your own values and beliefs, and that's what makes this story so fascinating, even decades after both men are gone. If this story surprised you, if it made you think differently about these two Hollywood legends, then do me a favor. Hit that like button right now because it really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more content like this. Share this video with anyone you know who loves classic movies or Hollywood history because this is the kind of story that doesn't get told enough. And definitely subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another deep dive into the secrets, scandals, and surprising truths about the stars we thought we knew. Trust me, there are so many more stories where this came from, and I can't wait to share them with you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.